Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Sound is all good? Perfect. Great. Yes, hello. I am Ciara Sherlock, and I am really delighted to be kicking this conference off. Really exciting. I'm going to be talking about psychedelics and the digital age. So I'm going to start with telling you a little bit about myself. Who am I? Good question. To some, I may seem like your typical tree-hugging hippie, but over the past 2.5 years, I've been taken on a wildly interesting personal and professional journey after founding the Psychedelic Society in March 2015. Well, why did I do that? I wanted to find the others, as the great Timothy Leary put it. Towards the end of 2014 and around early 2015, I found myself feeling a little bit isolated and a little bit lost. I had returned from living in Holland for a while, and I had had many mind-expanding experiences while I was living there. Which led to a lot of self-realizations and personal development and growth. And when I came back to Dublin, I felt that the big shifts that had happened within me weren't really supported by my family or my friends or my community at the time. So I was also super enthusiastic about the research that I was coming across online about psychedelics and mental health, as well as the groups and gatherings that I was kind of finding out about online. For example, the Psychedelic Society of San Francisco and the Psychedelic Society in the UK as well. So yeah, that to me, I kind of thought, well, that's exactly what Ireland needs, or more so, that's exactly what I need in Ireland. So I'll speak a little bit more on how I did that with the Psychedelic Society of Ireland and how I used the tools of the digital age a little bit later on. But first, I would like to see a show of hands. How many people in the room have heard of a psychedelic before? Raise your hands. Cool. Okay, most people. How many people in the room have taken a psychedelic, had a psychedelic experience before? A couple of people. Cool. Well, let's start with the basics. What does psychedelic mean? So the term was coined by Humphrey Osmond, who was a psychiatrist, and he said that psychedelic means mind manifesting. So when you relate that to a psychedelic experience, it means that it's a process in which the mind reveals itself to itself. And the psychedelic has the primary action of altering an individual's perception and cognition, and it causes the individual to experience things out of this realm of consciousness. So yeah, you have a lot of different types of psychedelics. Here are just a few. So you have LSD or acid. You have psilocybin found in magic mushrooms and truffles. You have mescaline found in peyote and San Pedro cactus. DMT in ayahuasca or in crystal form. And it's also worth mentioning MDMA and cannabis. They're similar but different. They're still very relevant in therapy and medicine, but they're not exactly the same as psychedelics. And if you look under your seats, you'll find a party bag of these substances for everyone in the audience. I'm joking, don't check. No, you won't, because these substances are really illegal. Although they don't have detrimental effects on mental health and they're not addictive, in fact, they can do quite the opposite. More on this later on. Many psychedelic drugs are classified as Schedule 1, meaning they have no medically accepted use and are completely illegal. So technically, you can be put in jail for 7 years for picking some magic mushrooms that are currently growing in the Wicklow Mountains. So don't do that. So why is this bad? Well, because of the law, there's severe limitations on research of these substances. When before the laws were changed, there was a lot of research going on. So the government laws are depriving people of medicine that can potentially seriously help them. And the lack of education is causing people to have loads of misconceptions. So what happens when you take a psychedelic? Well, it's practically impossible to put into words what you see and what you feel when you're under the influence of a psychedelic, but studies have shown that people report powerful mystical or spiritual experiences when under the influence. And the mystical experience can be defined by 6 aspects. So they are feeling of interconnectedness and unity, sacredness and awe, a sense of having uncovered some objective truth about reality, a feelings of peace and joy, transcendence of space and time, and ineffability, meaning not being able to adequately describe the experience in words. So now that we know what psychedelics are and what they do, let's talk about the movement. So the definition of a movement is a group of people working together to advance their shared social, political, cultural, or artistic ideas. So for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to split the psychedelic movements into loosely three waves. So first of all, you have your tribal, ancient religion, and paganism use of psychedelics. So medicinal and ceremonial uses of plant medicines by indigenous tribes all over the world spans back thousands and thousands of years, but they were greatly destroyed by Western invasion and new religious groups over time. In ancient Greece, there was Lucis and the mysterious ceremonies of the most famous religious rites, secret religious rites. And that spans back to 500 or maybe even 1000 BC. This stuff is so interesting. I would really recommend looking into that kind of stuff. I'd love to talk about it now, but I don't have time. But yeah, we also have then the witch hunts of the late 16th century across Europe and America, which stamped out herbal and plant medicine usage and ceremonial ritualism. So this culture was again destroyed by Catholicism and Lutheranism in order to gain a sense of security and control and public order. And also maybe against repressing females as well, you know. They were all about getting rid of the witches, you know. If she is suspected a witch, condemn her to death, you know. Maybe they were just against independent female thinkers. Who knows? You'll see up there the picture of the witch and a broomstick. I wonder, does anyone know why witches flew on broomsticks? If you don't, it's an interesting story with a psychedelic answer. I'll let you Google it, or maybe you can ask me in the questions if we get time. But so that was the first wave. So the second wave then, part one of the second wave, was the scientific and psychotherapy movement with psychedelics. So you had people like Aleister Crowley, who brought peyote to the States and Europe in the early 1900s. And then you have people like Albert Hofmann, who discovered LSD in 1943. And Stan Grof, who's the godfather of LSD-assisted psychotherapy, and he did research throughout the 50s and is still alive today. And Timothy Leary and Dennis McKenna and Terence McKenna were the psychedelic apostles, spreading the news, and all these guys were spreading the news of the power of the substances and the necessity of the psychedelic movement. So during that kind of time period, psychedelics were rediscovered and used in a less cultural, ceremonial way, but in a more scientific and therapeutic ways, as well as tools for cultural revolution and social change. And this was possible due to books and letters and new means of scientific research and travel being more possible, things like that. So there was a phase when the psychedelic discoveries into mental health treatment were really incredibly promising and groundbreaking. The spread of this news was slow globally, though. I mean, it was hard. There was like a lack of access to scientific papers, and we didn't have things like the internet to spread the word. So then you have kind of, part two, the hippie movement. Psychedelics, particularly LSD, became widespread throughout Europe, especially in the States as well, causing people to wake up to government control and causing people to disagree with capitalism and being drafted to war. So this sparked a massive rebellion. And then came the short but very sweet period of free-loving, open-minded, alternative culture of the hippie movement of the late 60s and early 70s. But, of course, the government needed to take lethal action in order to gain control, like the religions of the past. So in 1971, the war on drugs was created. Fear tactics were used and misinformation was spread. And there was no internet to Google the truth back then. So new government laws classified psychedelics as Class A drugs, claiming they have absolutely no therapeutic benefits or medical use, and forced psychedelic research to come to a standstill. And here's a quote by the great Terence McKenna explaining the truth on the war on drugs. Psychedelics are illegal, not because a loving government is concerned that you will jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. So the laws may have stopped the research, but it didn't stop the use of psychedelics. And this is where it gets interesting for you guys. The part 2 of that, a small number of the hippies of the 60s became the tech leaders of the 70s and 80s. Steve Jobs, of course, publicly stated that his LSD experiences were in the most important of his life, which led him to creating the Apple computer in 1976. And then you have this character, Bob Wallace, who originally worked for Microsoft with Bill Gates. And he went on to develop the idea called shareware in the early 80s, which was a computer program used to share information freely. So reportedly, he had the idea when he was under the influence of LSD, and his idea was to use this program to share psychedelic information and scientific research and psychedelic harm reduction. And with his success of this, he financially supported all the leading psychedelic organizations that are still doing amazing work today. MAPS, the Hefter Foundation, he funded Arrowid and DanceSafe and many, many more. So his idea of using the internet as a vehicle for spreading truthful information, connecting on a deeper intellectual level, unifying people on a global scale is really psychedelic in itself. So at this point in time, the internet was coming to life. And I think both the psychedelic experience and the internet experience are really similar. Psychedelics increase communication between parts of the brain that are less likely to be connected otherwise and communicate with each other. And that's what the internet is doing with people around the world. The concept of the internet is like the definition of the mystical experience that we had, the interconnectedness of all things and uncovering truth about reality. So Bryan's going to speak a little bit more later on all that kind of really cool nerdy stuff. But so the idea of reprogramming the brain, reprogramming the world with the internet and with psychedelics, giving way for new ideas, opening of minds and global connection. It's all really, really interesting. And like, with all this in mind, just going back to the Just Say No campaign, around that time, people were told to just say no to drugs, just say no. And just saying no to drugs is fine if they're going to cause harm for your body or your mind, but if they're going to cure your mental health illness and if it's going to help shape the future of the digital world, should you really just say no? And who knows where we would be today if the therapeutic and technology developments had continued to be influenced by psychedelics at that time. So we are now enjoying a third wave psychedelic movement, and we're experiencing the results of what the technology hippies wanted in the past. This is what they wanted to create, a model of the central nervous system and the interconnectedness of all things, and the free sharing of unstoppable truthful information. The third wave is down to a few things, but one really being a key one is the digital age. So thanks to the digital age, we have the spread of information and news via the internet. We have endless information at our fingertips, and I could go on about everything that we have. But the main things that I would recommend you checking out on the psychedelic side of things are the psychedelic.community and the Global Psychedelic Network. Thanks to the digital age, we see a resurrection of scientific research with the use of modern technology being done by the incredible teams of people at the Beckley Foundation and MAPS and the Hefter Foundation. And these studies are being published on a more public level online. So I don't have time to go through all of these. Oh, it seems to be cut off a little bit at the end. But I would highly recommend looking into this research. Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is being used to treat things like severe PTSD, using couples therapy for treatment-resistant depression, for suicidality, for enhancing mindfulness abilities, for promoting neurogenesis. Cannabis is being used to treat pretty much everything these days. And thanks to the digital age, we also have mental breakdowns. And with the positives of the digital age come the negatives. I'm sure everyone can relate to this picture a lot. We may feel more connected when we're on our laptops, but we're massively disconnected from ourselves and nature due to all the time and energy that technology demands from us. And humanity is experiencing this huge spiritual crisis at the moment. There's a huge cry for alternative mental health treatments brought on by, to treat the conditions brought on by the problems and stress of the modern world that we live in. So yeah, alternatives have never been more necessary, and many people believe that psychedelics are the only thing powerful enough to break us out of these conditions and save ourselves and to save the world. So thanks to the modern age we live in, we also have all this kind of stuff that's helping the psychedelic movement. So it's easier to gain knowledge through resources. You have things like the darknet. It's never been easier. You can literally buy drugs online now with the internet, and it's really easy. There are global conferences happening all over the world, again, interconnecting everybody on the world in a really incredible way at things like Psychedelic Science and Breaking Convention. And you have the positive effects of microdosing coming out and becoming way more popular. I mean, you just have to think about Silicon Valley, and that's something that's really, really popular there. You have more and more public figures coming out about their psychedelic experiences, Steve Jobs being one of the main people. Online activist campaigns and petitions and things like that are really easily spread online, and it's easier to travel and stuff like that now, you know, so all these things are really, really helping. However, I still do think that there is a danger of miscommunication, and I really feel like we can't make the mistakes that we made in the past. We really do need to focus on education, harm reduction, safe sourcing, drug testing. Encouragement of greater awareness and openness around this topic is really needed. And also, for the record, the safe, intentional, conscious use of psychedelics is what's really needed. So using these substances out of context won't just cure your mental health illness. And in fact, when used in the wrong set and setting, they can do more bad than good. So please do keep that in mind. But yeah, so with all this at my fingertips, I'm going to share just a little bit on how I use the tools of the digital age to create a grassroots movement in Ireland. So as I said, at the time in early 2015, I felt called to create the community that I wanted to be surrounded by. And that started with a Facebook page. I held an event in which I promoted on Facebook and Eventbrite.ie and a few posters around town, which really quickly and surprisingly turned into a really big, popular, sold-out event with Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris from the Beckley Foundation and Stephen Reid, who founded the Psychedelic Society in the UK and was also a major inspiration to me. I have a lot to thank him for playing a massive role in my journey. And all of a sudden, a group of people came together over a controversial topic. And most people had been seeking something like this in society for a long time, but had just never been exposed to it. So from there, my work as a psychedelic person began and grew into three main areas of focus. So the first being cultivating the Irish psychedelic community with the Psychedelic Society of Ireland. I've been doing that by hosting events, seminars, suppers, integration circles, social gatherings, and seeing the community come together and branch out has been really motivating and inspiring for me. It's permanently altered my reality in a really positive way. It's really, really mind-blowing. And the next event is on the 20th of September this month, 9:20. If anyone is interested, it's going to be in Dublin, and it's going to be really, really great. So check out the website and the Facebook stuff for that. Please do join us. And the second focus is in festival harm reduction and education and drug welfare. So I've done training and volunteering with organisations such as Cosmicare and festivals like Boom Festival in Portugal. And this basically involves working with people who are having overwhelming substance-related experiences in unsuitable environments. So basically giving emotional support to people that have taken too many drugs at a festival and that are having a tough time. And last year I founded a project called Space, in which I create relaxed environments at festivals where people can come if they need to seek refuge to escape the hecticness of it all. So we offer like a cozy, quiet space and have sober people who are available to chat about drug experiences and offer some practical information on safety and integration. And the harm reduction and welfare work, it can be challenging to do, but I feel like it's one of the most important things we need to integrate into our festival culture in Ireland. So I'm really passionate about that one. And the third aspect of my work as a psychedelic person is my work co-facilitating psychedelic experience weekends in the Netherlands. So these are 3-day-long retreat-style weekends in the Netherlands, and they involve mindfulness, connection exercises, body work, nature walks, and the main attraction being a psychedelic trip. So day 1 is preparation day, day 2 is the experience day, and day 3 is the integration day. So on day 2, we give our participants psychedelic truffles, which are very similar to magic mushrooms, and they're legal in the Netherlands. So participants are given doses of truffles and encouraged to sit back quietly and wear an eye mask and experience the trip while listening to a specially curated psychedelic playlist. So this environment is similar to the setting used in currently used in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy settings, and many of the participants come away from the weekend saying they have had one of the most, if not the most, profound and meaningful experience of their lives. So here we're taking full advantage of the digital tools and the alternative laws in the Netherlands. So we are openly advertising facilitated legal psychedelic experience weekends in the Netherlands using online applications and Skype interviews. So you can find out more via that link, or you can ask me about it afterwards. So yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what I'm up to. So yeah, where else has the psychedelic movement brought me with thanks to the tools of the digital age? Well, I've been using social media outlets to gather the masses and make contact with people. Been using the internet to find out about conferences all over the world, sending applications via email, and ending up at conferences like Beyond Psychedelics in Prague and Breaking Convention in the UK and ICPR in Amsterdam. And connecting with the global community via the Global Psychedelic Network, which is like a social media network for psychedelic people. Finding harm reduction organizations around Europe and applying to volunteer and train with them. I have used crowdfunding campaigns to fund projects such as the Space Project and the trip to Psychedelic Science conference, which I was really excited to go to, the biggest psychedelic conference in history. That was last April. I'm now accepting donations via Patreon to allow the growth of the Psychedelic Society of Ireland. And I'm also learning myself endlessly through internet sources. So what can you do to fuel the fire? And why now? I mean, I think Western societies are waking up and becoming more conscious and aware of what they're putting into their bodies, their minds, and their environments. So how would you do it if you have used psychedelics before? What you can do is use the digital tools to educate yourself on the topic. You can come out of the psychedelic closet if you've used psychedelics before. Be open about your psychedelic interests. Make a post on Facebook maybe, or in your social media outlets, which is like a big challenging one, but again, it makes a difference. And yeah, just to say, I mean, it's not about being the counterculture anymore the way it was in the 60s. That was a big mistake. It's about integrating our interests and knowledge into the society that we live in. And it's time to help make psychedelics mainstream. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to continue to use the digital age as a tool to spread information, to encourage education, and to cultivate the vision I have of a more compassionate, conscious, loving reality. And just to finish up, I want to leave you with a quote. I want to share something from Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, someone who is an absolute huge inspiration to me. He shared this at Psychedelic Science in California in April, and it really resonated with me really, really deeply. He said, "Become more than a dream." And when I founded the Psychedelic Society of Ireland, I could have never imagined it growing into what it's grown into today, or having the opportunities that I've had. It was just a dream of mine, wanting to live in a world that understood me more and that I could feel more comfortable in. And now it's really turned into something way more than a dream. So with that, I will leave it there. Thank you very, very much for your attention. I also just want to say that I actually can't stay here tomorrow. So if you want to have a chat with me, please do approach me. I'd love to have a chat. I'm actually flying to Amsterdam tonight to facilitate an experience this weekend, in which 14 participants will have their first mystical psychedelic experience in a safe and held environment. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Thank you. And now I'm really happy to welcome my really good friend, Bryan Duggan, who's going to talk about some other really cool psychedelic stuff.
Good job.
Thanks, Bryan.
Awesome. So, hi everybody, and thanks very much for Ciara for giving that really excellent introduction to the psychedelic experience and the psychedelic movement in Ireland. So my name is Bryan Duggan. I teach computer science in the Dublin Institute of Technology, and I'm the AI developer for a virtual reality experience called Deep that I'm going to have here this afternoon and tomorrow, so you guys can try it out. It's, I guess, has some psychedelic elements in it. Most interestingly, it's a therapeutic virtual reality application, so it's designed to help people to deal with anxiety, and it does that by encouraging people to do deep yoga breathing. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself first and how I came to give this talk, or how I came to talk about psychedelics and virtual reality. So I teach mostly game development and creative coding courses in DIT, and I've been teaching that for about 15 years. I started making VR projects in 2012 for the Oculus Rift, the CV1. So just with regards to what I teach mostly creative coding. So creative coding is the idea that you can use code like an art medium. So it's like a pen and paper or a guitar or something. You can use it basically to make beautiful things and also to express your deepest inner thoughts and desires. So I think also that creative coding is a great way for people to learn how to program, because the idea with creative coding is that you don't need to know everything when you start. You just basically learn as you go, and then hopefully you get into a flow state and you enjoy the process of creativity and you learn what you need in order to complete the project that you're working on. So I also try and get my students to go into a flow state, and I talk about flow states a lot. Flow states are this concept from psychology by Czelemski, was the guy who kind of popularized the idea of a flow state. It's the idea that you're sort of completely immersed in the task to the exclusion of everything else. And sometimes when people are in a flow state, they forget to eat, and just time sort of passes by. It's another kind of altered state of consciousness. just to show you some of these projects, these are the types of projects that my students do. So the projects at the top there, they're hoods for sci-fi devices. So they're basically hoods for spaceships. These are second-year computer science students, and they make these hoods completely out of code. So the idea is that they're kind of making a toy, but in the process of making a toy for themselves to play with, they have to learn how to do computational thinking and software design. The bottom ones there, these are something beautiful to enjoy whilst listening to music. So this is how my students hopefully learn how to write code. So they learn it by making sort of fun things. Why am I talking about psychedelics and virtual reality? Well, as Ciara says, this is really the third phase or the third wave of the psychedelic movement, and we're kind of in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance at the moment. And there's lots of examples of this. If you look at, for example, the Doctor Strange movie, which came out quite recently, that's really a homage to psychedelics and to DMT in particular, which is dimethyltryptamine, a very strong psychedelic. There's even a scene where Doctor Strange goes on, a DMT trip quite at the start of the movie, goes down this tunnel, there's lots of lights, experiences different dimensions. Also, there's lots of research coming out now about the therapeutic applications of psychedelics. And a lot of this research has been published in mainstream media like the Journal and the Irish Times. They're publishing results of studies on, for example, using psilocybin for treatment of depression and ayahuasca for stuff like alcoholism. Also, there's lots of psychedelic culture around at the moment. Microdosing, as Ciara mentioned, is this big thing in the tech community and also amongst creative people. It's the idea that people take a small dose of a psychedelic substance in order to increase creativity or mindfulness or productivity. So microdosing is a thing that a lot of people are talking about. Even I read an article about it in the Journal. And then there's lots of psychedelic culture around. For example, there's these huge, big psychedelic festivals taking place, like Boom Festival, Burning Man, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. And also, who's heard of Big Les? All right, so Big Les is, I think, one of the reasons why psychedelics are particularly well known about with males in, say, the early 20s. A lot of the students that I teach are quite psychedelically aware, and I think the reason why is because of the Big Les comic, or cartoon. So this is a YouTube series made by some guys in Australia, and there's loads of psychedelic references in Big Les. So, also for me personally, the last 2 years have been a really sort of like a time of great change and great personal development in my life. Firstly, I worked on these two really cool VR projects, which I'm going to talk about later, Deep and Forms. Also, I joined the Psychedelic Society of Ireland, and this journey of sort of psychedelic discovery eventually brought me to Azora, which is one of these big psychedelic festivals that I mentioned. The Psychedelic Society, as Ciara talked about earlier, we don't take psychedelics at the events, but these are ways for people to network and learn about psychedelic experiences. And they're vegan co-created suppers. And I think these events really kind of evoke a lot of what the psychedelic experience is about. They're about people coming together and, learning from each other. The people in the society, I think, are awakened beings. They're conscious people. And they're united in curiosity about all things psychedelic. For example, this is a hike that we go on. We call this hikeadelic therapy. So my friend Garrick runs these events where we take a very small dose of magic mushrooms and we go hiking in the forest. It's a sort of a therapeutic event. And like I say, my psychedelic journey, I could talk a lot more about it, but eventually brought me to this incredible festival called Azora. So Azora takes place in a city about 2 hours drive from Budapest in Hungary, and it brings together, I think it's like 50,000 people from all over the world, basically in a celebration of psychedelic culture. Azora sort of like comes from the psychedelic culture that started out in the 60s, festivals like Woodstock. In the 70s, you had Goa in India. In the 80s, you had the Summer of Love in Manchester. And so Azora is like a temporary autonomous zone, Everybody decides at the start of the festival to be nice to each other. Everybody's friendly. Everybody supports each other. And there's no drunkenness, interestingly, at this festival, in contrast to a lot of Irish festivals like Electric Picnic, And also you see all age groups together at this festival. There's also at festivals like Azora, lots of other, I suppose, ways to achieve altered states of consciousness. So there's lots of body work workshops. There's yoga, meditation. These are like endogenous ways of achieving altered states of consciousness. And then there's a talk series that I got to participate in when I was at Azora. Something like Octavio Retting, who talked about the use of toad medicine. It's this venom of the Sonoran desert toad, and it produces a really strong psychedelic called 5-MeO-DMT. And then David Luke, who talked about exceptional human experiences, and our good friend Patrick Everett from the Psychedelic Society of Ireland talked about Western esotericism, Aleister Crowley, and his use of peyote. One thing I just wanted to mention, there was a really incredible talk from a guy called Kalindi Lee, who's this martial artist from Detroit, who takes mega doses of magic mushrooms and then brings the knowledge back from his experience so we can all learn about what happens when you take like 60 dried grams of magic mushrooms, which is a really astonishingly high dose. Of course, there's, it's perfectly safe to do that. And that's just a picture of me to prove that I was there at Azora. So what is a psychedelic experience? When I think about a psychedelic experience, I think to convey it, basically, I like to use different maps, right? And these kind of like help people to understand and even help me to understand what a psychedelic experience is all about. And this is my favorite map, and it's from Timothy Leary's 1964 book, The Psychedelic Experience. It's based on the Bardo Thodol, which is an 8th century Buddhist manuscript that describes the soul's journey after death and before rebirth. And why this is a good map is because a psychedelic experience, a strong one, is a kind of ego death, So your identity and your education and your sense of yourself is dissolved, and you get to experience this reality in a state of like just pure awareness. So that's what a psychedelic experience is like. He describes a psychedelic experience as consisting of 3 stages, which he calls bardos. This comes from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So the Chikhai Bardo, the Kronid Bardo, and the Sidpa Bardo. Chikhai Bardo is the transcendent stage of a psychedelic experience. The Kronid Bardo is the visionary part, and this is the part that most people, I guess, are familiar with, And then the Sidpa Bardo is the integration, what happens and how you integrate the psychedelic experience back into your life. The book also contains affirmations and it's where the concept of set and setting, and also guidelines for dosages of different substances. Another great map I find for the psychedelic experience is from Dakota Wint's YouTube channel, and he talks about the 4 levels of ego death. Level 1 being a dissolution of social barriers. This is a questioning stage when people question reality and what's the nature of reality. Level 2 then is when the body dissolves and you don't feel as if there's a boundary between yourself and the rest of existence. Level 3 then, the astral plane, the visionary stage. And then level 4, which is like, I guess, what Kalindi's talking about, is this stage when there's no thought and just pure conscious awareness. Another great map is, I think, Timothy Leary's 5 levels of consciousness. And this was from a record that he made in 1966. Message to the Youth of America, and he talks about sleeping consciousness, waking consciousness, which is this consciousness, also game consciousness, body consciousness, which is a heightened awareness of one's own physical body, cellular consciousness, which is an awareness of the actual cellular processes going on in your body, and then atomic consciousness. So we are all of these things because we are atoms and cells in a body, We are all these things, but the psychedelic experience can awaken us to these different levels of our own ability, our own consciousness. As Ciara said, there are lots of ways to have a psychedelic experience, You need to look this up yourself, but some experiences are short, Something like DMT is like a 10-minute experience. An acid trip is a 12-hour experience. And now we're kind of understanding what happens in the brain when a person has a psychedelic experience. And these pictures come from a study done by Imperial College London, and they show different, the brain up on the top is on a placebo, and the brains on the bottom are scans of their brains where people take LSD. And what happens is, most of these substances work on the serotonin receptors in the brain, and serotonin is a neurotransmitter. So it's how the neurons in your brain communicate, and these become perturbed during a psychedelic experience, and the brain is in this hyper-connected state. People have compared it to a childlike state, And this can be incredibly powerful. We're now, using this in therapeutic context as well. And of course, Psychedelics have been used in a therapeutic context in indigenous cultures for maybe 5,000 years. You know, the use of ayahuasca is at least 5,000 years in South America, particularly in Peru. So VR and psychedelics, what's the connection, right? Terence McKenna, who's one of my heroes, talked a lot about psychedelics and VR in his book, The Archaic Revival. And he was quite keen because he actually tried psychedelics. He died in 2000, but he tried psychedelics before he died. He tried psychedelics, tried virtual reality before he died. He tried lots of psychedelics. And he was quite keen that virtual reality wouldn't be seen as like a safe and harmless substitute. You know, there's no substitute for what actually happens in your brain during one of the, if you take a substance. You know, you put on a VR headset. Sometimes people think that there's a similarity between them because there's this visionary aspect. You know, when you take a psychedelic substance, the visions you get are created by your own brain. You put on a VR headset and the visions are created by a computer. They're created by another person. I think there's basically three ways in which the psychedelic experience can be conveyed through virtual reality. First of all, through the psychedelic aesthetic. Secondly, through psychedelic consciousness, which is evoking this feeling of oneness and connectedness. And then thirdly, which is the way that psychedelics can awaken people to aspects of their true nature. So now I'm going to talk about some virtual reality projects that I think bring some of the psychedelic experience to virtual reality, right? So first of all is this project called Chroma Lab. Some of these projects I'm going to show you initially, these come from a Reddit forum called Rift into the Mind. And this is basically a forum where people discuss different VR applications which are fun to use on psychedelics. My own feeling is the best place to take psychedelic is out in nature, you know? But nevertheless, these are things that you can do whilst using a psychedelic. And this is basically a particle simulation, right? This is a toy. People would call this a tripping toy. And it's really beautiful. Somehow it evokes some of the visual aspects of what some psychedelic experiences can look like. And it's just a really beautiful experience which you can just escape into. Now, there's meant to be sound here, so I'm not too sure why the sound is not coming up. Second of all, is there no sound? How do I turn the sound up on my laptop? Is it this one? Yeah, it's turned up fully. Maybe it's just the output is not working. If there's no sound, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I can do without sound. This is a project called Blurtasia. This project, I think, is quite nice because it takes advantage of a feature called pareidolia, which is the mind identifying shapes and patterns where none actually exist. And what this is like basically a virtual reality sculpture. And on the surfaces of the sculpture are these evolving textures. And sometimes when you look at these textures, they have something of the character of what the LSD visuals look like. And also, sometimes you can see faces evolve, and sometimes you can see dogs and stuff like that. Again, these evoke something of what a psychedelic experience looks like. Now, I'd really like to have sound for this one, but if I don't, it's cool. The reason why I picked this project, this is called Microdose VR, and this is by one of my favorite visionary artists called Android Jones. Now, his work was on a show at Azora. Basically, they had this gallery which had lots of beautiful visionary art, and you could just go and, like a lot of people take psychedelics and they like to basically appreciate the visionary art, and it has a really different quality when people take psychedelics. So this is basically, he describes it as a platform for participants to alter their own minds co-creatively and intuitively while expanding the limits of human cognition. It's designed so that people can enjoy it, but also to create beautiful aesthetic for electronic music performances. And it has been experienced at lots of rock and electronic music festivals. Android Jones says, "I have seen things in this life that I am incapable of translating into words. I have visited realms where imagination ends and the terrifying beauty of infinity unfolds over and over again." So this is inspired by the psychedelic experience, and some of these visuals are reminiscent of the things that people see when they take a psychedelic. So this is a project called Space Dream VR. I got this reference from the Reddit, you know, and I really like this one. This was developed by a programmer called Justin Davis. He's also a 3D artist, and he made everything in this project himself. One of the reasons why I kind of liked this project as well is because it has giant psychedelic magic mushrooms in it, which glow. But also, he made the entire experience himself, and He made it. He at one stage was addicted to drugs and suffered from depression, and he had a Christian mystical experience, right? And after the Christian mystical experience he had, he gained the ability to see fractal patterns, right? And he claims to have reproduced all of the level designs in this game from lucid dreams and visions that he believes that were shown to him by God, you know? So I think this has got definitely a lot of psychedelic aspects to it. All right. These are projects that I think evoke something of psychedelic consciousness. First of all, the wave, right? So this is basically a shared rave. So this is a wonderful project. This is a multi-user network project. So the idea here is that people can rave together, you know, remotely. So if I wanted to go to a rave and I didn't want to leave my house, I can put on my VR set and I can rave with people around the world, and they've got their VR headsets. One of the things I love about this project is because you can buy trips in it. So you can collect these coins in the experience, and then you can put them into a machine, you get a trip, and then you put the trip on somebody else's virtual head, and you have a little trip together, you know? So this, again, has lots of psychedelic visuals, and, you know, it sort of evokes something of the festival culture, you know, but just through virtual reality. So this is a project called Gnosis. So actually, Gnosis is an interesting idea. Gnosis is experiential knowledge. And Terence McKenna talks a lot about Gnosis and a psychedelic experience being a type of Gnosis. It's knowledge that you get by having the experience. And Rob describes this as similar to an acid trip. This was the Amaze, one of the grand finalists at the Amaze Festival this year. One of the cool things about this, it has this force-directed graph of concepts. So I like this project because it encapsulates the idea of stepping outside of the mind and looking at your mind from the outside. So you can see all these concepts together and how they're related. Also, it has lots of synesthesia in it. So there's lots of things in this that basically get generated directly from the music. I really love to have audio for this one, but it doesn't matter. If I don't have audio, you'll just have to trust me that this project sounds amazing. We're now getting into projects, these are definitely projects that evoke psychedelic consciousness. I think these evoke psychedelic consciousness because they don't just have the visual aspect. This also is something that you control with sound. So you make a sound into this thing. You're encouraged to hum really loudly. Now, humming, as you might know, or sound, is a sort of an ancient technique to achieve altered state of consciousness. You might have heard of mantra meditation, where you basically make sounds, certain sounds, and they basically cause your brain to stop thinking, and you hopefully evoke more of a sense of an awareness or, So what happens in this is you basically make the sound into the microphone. The sound is reflected back to you, but it's distorted, you know, and it basically fills your ears with the sound that you hear. And also these visuals are generated from the sound, and every time you have this experience, it's a different experience. This is Robert Arnott's Sound Self project. He describes this as a technodeliac, and it's about 4 years of work he spent on this project. And he was inspired to make this project from an acid trip that he had at Burning Man. And he says that he had this experience at Burning Man where he came to the realization that he was one with the entire universe. He wanted other people to have this experience, and so he created this technodeliac, this thing that you can use in order to hopefully achieve this sense of oneness through virtual reality. Again, I'd really love to have sound, but never mind, I have no sound, I'll just move on. Okay, this next project is my own project, which you can experience here. And this was basically a project that I've been working on in a team with Owen Harris, Nikki Schmidt, and Andy Mooney. And this is Deep. So with Deep, you wear a breathing sensor. And this is designed basically to encourage people to do deep yoga-style breathing, mindful breathing. And this project actually works incredibly, right? So you have to wear lots of technology to experience Deep. But when you actually do this thing, you find yourself, after the experience of Deep, you just feel very calm and you feel very connected. And it's to connect you through this, you know, through your breath to the rest of reality. There's also lots of other psychedelic aspects in here, like certain things will respond to your breath. As you breathe in and breathe out, things will glow. And then there's this lovely moment here, which I'll probably just skip forward because I know I'm running out of time. But you move through this tunnel here and all of the lights glow, and then they come back in as you breathe in and out. So it feels very, very psychedelic. So as I was working on Deep, I also used to have, I think, a creative process, which was very reminiscent of a psychedelic experience. I'd go running, and then I'd come back, and I would code up these creatures. I'd have all these ideas when I was out running, and then I'd code up these creatures, and then they'd start swimming around me. And I think this is, for me, like the psychedelic experience described by Timothy Leary. So the first stage was this transcendent stage where I was realizing the connectivity between all of the things in this world. This is called Forms, by the way. This is my own personal project. And then I would code it up and put my VR headset on, and these creatures would start swimming around all around me. So this was like the visionary stage of a psychedelic experience. And then I believe this really awakened me to my creative self, you know? So I'm a programmer. And I found I was able to make these things, and I looked at them sometimes and I thought they were really beautiful. So this awoken me to my capability to make beautiful things, or my artistic side, you know? So in the same way a psychedelic experience can awaken you to aspects of your true nature, programming this experience awoken me to the aspect of my nature, which is my creative self. And I spent many hours just like exploring this world that I had created entirely from code. You know, Terence McKenna talks about the psychedelic experience, and he when he talked about it, he thought we can become anything we want in VR, you know? So I'm going to develop this further so you can be the octopus. You know, because an octopus, Terence McKenna, he believes an octopus basically embodies its thoughts in its movement and in its colors on its body, you know? One of the other things making this thing out of code made me feel is it made me think about the simulation hypothesis, which maybe you've heard of, because it's a theory that is popularized by Elon Musk. The simulation hypothesis, many times when people take off a VR headset, they say, wow, like what was real? Is this real, or was the VR real? And in fact, this simulation hypothesis is a very old idea in philosophy. The Chinese philosopher Wang Zhu in 300 BC wrote, "A man dreamed he was a butterfly, and when he woke thought, am I a man who dreamt I was a butterfly, or am I a butterfly dreaming I was a man?" So that's one of the things that happens when people do VR, you know, and also with psychedelics as well, because suddenly what you think is real is no longer real. Timothy Leary talks about the 5 levels of consciousness. Oh yeah, what did I want to say here? Yeah. So this is my little takeaway, right? This is Kalindi Lee, is one of the talks that I saw at Azora. And Kalindi takes these heroic, or he calls them mega doses of mushrooms. 5 dry grams is the standard dose. He takes up to 60 dry grams. And at 60 dry grams, there's no him left. He's just pure conscious awareness. And Kalindi believes that at this dose of mushrooms, your consciousness becomes infinitely small, and you can see past the Planck's constant length, right? So Planck's constant is the smallest unit of measurement that we have. And he believes you can go smaller than that, and you can see the programming that actually generates this reality. And so what Kalindi wants is he wants scientists and VR developers to take these big doses of mushrooms, go to this, what he calls the info particle realm, bring back the programming, and then generate VR from the programming that people learn from these high doses of mushrooms. So I think this is a really cool concept, you know? I think even artistically, it's a beautiful idea, don't you think? Anyway, so yeah, that kind of sums up my talk. I just sort of crammed a lot of stuff into a very short time. I have some other talks on this which are a little bit longer, but I hope that was of some interest in you. If you want to learn more about me, I have a blog, BryanDuggan.com. Deep you can get to experience here at Republica, and you can also check out my psychedelic playlist on Spotify. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bryan. We have about 5 minutes left for questions. In case you'd like to ask one, you can just give me a sign of hand, and I'd be happy to come over with a microphone. Yes, both of you, of course. Whilst you're all warming up your hand. Okay, there's one, all right, and 2. Okay, great. I'll come to you first.
Hi, thank you both for great talks. I love psychedelic experiences, and the way I use them is to enrich my experience in the reality as we all experience. I just wanted to ask you both, how do you ensure that both the psychedelic experience coming from substance use and from VR doesn't take over the experience in the real world, and people don't get bored at the real world just because there's so much nice stuff.
Great question.
Somewhere.
Here, why don't you go first?
Can I take that microphone, maybe?
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you can hear me? Cool. So you're asking, how do people basically not get bored with real life when they're so immersed in the great times in virtual reality and psychedelics? Well, I think that can be a real struggle, and people might have all these big realizations about the world and the truth of the world and their own nature and the nature of reality when they take a psychedelic. And really the most important one... Okay, so there's 3 phases of the experience. Like from my point of view, you have the preparation, the experience itself, and the integration. And the integration process is something that is just really such a key part, because it's like, okay, you can have all these experiences, but you can't always be on psychedelics. And you have to take what you learn from those experiences and integrate them into your own life and make your life kind of better yourself and your reality from that. So, I mean, I can say from my own personal experience, like my basically integration process from all my experiences was founding the Psychedelic Society of Ireland and surrounding myself with the right kind of people. So, I mean, people might think otherwise, but I don't need to be tripping all the time. Like, I'm surrounded by all these amazing people and I'm immersed in this world. And that's kind of the integration process for me, and that's how I kind of don't get bored. Now, it can be isolating, as I shared from my own personal story, and I'm sure it's kind of the same with the virtual reality stuff. But again, it's about integrating what you take from those experiences and bringing them into your like daily reality. So I hope.
I'd maybe just briefly say 2 things on that one. First of all, we talk a lot about, in sort of psychedelic community, we talk a lot about grounding. So grounding basically means things that you do to basically bring you back to this reality. And it's quite important to do grounding. A lot of people I know would say that you shouldn't do psychedelics unless you have a spiritual practice like yoga, tai chi, meditation. And they're all things basically which can help ground you in this reality so you don't get lost in the mind. I would say from the perspective of VR and psychedelics as well, ideas like having the chakras, So the chakras are like kind of maps of consciousness, and they're basically ways of saying, give a little bit of attention to this part of your life, give a little bit of attention to this part of your life. And if you get the balance right, then you'll have, a rich life and a balanced life. So I think it's important to have a balanced life.
And one more question up here.
I'm just been stuck since you said it, but why do witches ride broomsticks?
Okay, you want to know. So basically, the active ingredient in LSD is found in ergot, which is a mold that grows on rye. So back in the day, and it also makes you really sick if you eat it, basically. So witches, women that liked to, explore altered states of consciousness and have herbal and plant medicine practices. They wanted to use ergot in order to get high. And so they needed a way to take the ergot without eating it because it would make them really sick. So they used their broomsticks to give themselves the ergot through other means. So it would be absorbed in the body more and it wouldn't make them sick. So they would put the broomsticks in their female parts and they would fly high on the broomsticks. So that is why witches ride broomsticks to give themselves psychedelics and by alternative means. So now you know, I said it.
What an epic story. I learned so much this morning. Are there any other hands going up quickly?
Any more questions?
I'll maybe ask a quick one because we've got if you can give a quick answer, 2 minutes left. I recently learned that there are sort of new, or maybe they're not so new, but drugs out there which are being sought by a bunch of young people that basically give you all the visuals but without the universe. So designer drugs that give you, all those trippy things that you showed in your graphics earlier, but without the mind-altering experience. How do you feel about people sort of seeking that route? And is that still a psychedelic experience for you?
Yeah, there's loads of different substances. I know of substances that will give you auditory hallucinations, but no visuals and no oneness. I think people will probably go for the classics. People will go, like, personally, I want to go for things that are, well, Terence McKenna he wanted to go for ones that come from nature, you know, and the ones that come from nature are ayahuasca, DMT, psilocybin mushrooms. You know, psilocybin mushrooms, the use predates, you know, the invention of the wheel, predates the discovery of fire. You know, it's been used for literally millions of years. So I kind of want to go for the ones which have a long history of human usage. Ayahuasca, like I say, is at least 5,000 years, and DMT is 5,000 years of use. So I think to go for the safer ones, you probably should stick to the ones from nature. But I think there are lots of substances which are there to be explored.
I mean, there are new kind of designer drugs. You see all these varied psychedelic drugs that are coming out now and have been, you know, were discovered mainly by Alexander Shulgin and Anne Shulgin in the past. I mean, it depends what people are taking drugs for, you know. Is it for exploring themselves? Is it for getting visuals? Is it for escapism? And I think the important point is to know that there are all different types of drugs, blanket term drugs, you know, psychedelics or opiates or stimulants or, you know, medicines like painkillers and stuff. And they can all be used for really different reasons. But there are psychedelics that can allow you to explore the innards of yourself.
So each to their own. Thank you so much for coming and opening the show and our minds this morning. Another big round of applause for the two of you, please. We have a 15-minute break now. After this 15-minute break, we'll be starting our program also on stage 2 with the topic of work and employment in the digital age. And here on stage 1, we've got one of my personal highlights of the day coming up with Mushan Zararif speaking about speculative tourism. See you all shortly.